Please welcome our Lineage panel. We have Eric, Harel, Sheeri, and Ernie today. And we're going to talk about Lineage. I have some notes on my phone. I'm not texting as we speak. And I'll get this on focus, do not disturb. And we get ready. So first, I have a few questions for the audience as we get started. Here we are. So thank you everyone for sticking with us. We'll do a quick round of introduction in a minute. Before we do that, who knows what Lineage is? Please show of hand.
Ooh, good.
Okay, so like maybe half. Oh, that's interesting. And who has a Lineage solution on the problems? Okay, so a few of you do have a solution, so that we'll talk about those. And who is using Open Lineage?
Can we raise our hands?
Yeah.
They like really high. Okay, so we have 3. Congrats. So I'll start with a quick introduction on what is data lineage. So it's interesting because I think data lineage, if you ask different people, they give you very different answers. And the reason for that is there are very different problems that Lineage solves, right? Lineage is not a feature, is not a solution, it's more like a means to an end. And I think in this panel, we do think, or I think, that it's very important to model what is actually happening, right? Like when people think about Lineage, they could think about, oh, this table or this column derived from another table or another column somewhere else. But it's really important to capture how the transformation is happening, how the data is coming from one point to another. And there's lots of metadata attached to the transformation itself and not just to the data assets that we've been talking about. And so some people care a lot about data reliability and how data gets from point A to point B, how things change, how dependencies between data sets are happening, and how to make sure data is reliably showing up in time and is correct. And there are a lot of people who care more about compliance, whether it's for privacy laws or for banking regulations, or general governance, and just knowing where this business metric is coming from. So there's lots of different applications of tracking lineage on how is data going from here to there. And so we have a panel of experts today to talk about this. So we'll do a quick round of introductions. One of you can start, and we'll do a quick, who are you? Where do you work? What brings you here today? Why are you part of this Open Lineage community that we started from? So who wants to start? Ernie? So Ernie, take it away.
Ernie Ostic with Manta Software, now an IBM company. Kind of was born in the ETL space some couple of decades ago, and that just sort of naturally led to being involved with Lineage and being passionate about it for a long time now.
My name is Sheeri Cabral. I work on Lineage at Collibra, which is a data governance software platform. I work in Boston. And the reason I like Open Lineage is that before I was a product manager, I was a database administrator for almost 20 years. And Open Lineage helps me overcome the challenges that I had managing data teams. And I'm like, this is the tool that I wanted, back in the day. So now I get to work on helping other people solve the challenges that I had much more easier. And I want to live in the world where there is an Open Lineage standard. It's a better world.
I love that, Sheeri. So my name is Harel. I currently work at Datadog on data lineage. Before that, I worked at Astronomer and WeWork and a few other smaller startups. Why I'm interested in Lineage is because Julian told me so when we started working at WeWork together. He's like, oh, you should care about this. It's like, okay, boss.
Very straightening like this.
Yeah, he was also not my boss, but he thought he was. But really, it was a big missing piece in our data ecosystem, and I think it still is, and we're slowly getting there to this better world that Sheeri is talking about. That gets me excited.
Hey everybody, I'm Veleker. I lead ISV partnerships at Atlan. I'm very glad to be here. Atlan's a metadata platform, so we know quite well that metadata provisioning has a direct impact on the ROI of data operations and also the quality of life of people associated with those operations. So I'm looking at a lot of them here today. I'm very glad to be here to talk about the topic.
Okay, so my first question, I realize I kind of talked over it a little bit in my introduction, but why do people need Lineage?
There are a bunch of different use cases, right? I think the one that gets the biggest flag waving, especially with banking regulations and debacles that happened, even 15 years ago with the banks, and being able to show to government regulators that they know what they're doing with their data, really compelled banks to be able to answer where does the data come from, and then be able to illustrate, once you find out where it comes from, who owns it, what is its data quality componentry, and can I really validate that the data that I'm providing to prove that my loans are in the right space is valid. So that pushed it a lot. GDPR just blew that right open, right? So now almost every industry needs to be able to illustrate and understand where data comes from so they can answer all of the issues about being able to forget people if they have to or understand where their breaches might be. That's a huge one. That's probably one of the biggest ones that got all the flag wavers. But certainly problem resolution is another big one. And we see a lot of folks that need Lineage for migration, right? They have a 20-year-old database system or older that they want to migrate up to the cloud and take advantage of the cloud. The people who manage that application, who had all that inherent knowledge of where the data came from, they've moved on, they've been promoted, they're elsewhere. And I need to be able to understand which of the 5,000 assets are in that old database do I still care about, and Lineage can help.
Anything to add? Sheeri, you want to?
Yeah, you talked about compliance and data provenance. Although you talked about data provenance, which is just a fancy way of saying where did my data come from, in the context of compliance. But it's also in the context of, stop me if you guys have been here before, you get a VP who looks at like two similar reports, and he's like, why are the sales numbers different in this report than that report? And then they call up you, or whatever, the head of the data team, and they're like, why are they different? And you're like, I'll get right on that. And it takes you a couple of days, and you're trying to track everything down, and it's spending a lot of your time. But then the VP doesn't know if they can trust any of the graphs that they see, right? So it loses that kind of just institutional trust in the data. And if the VP could like self-serve and look at it and say, hey, look, here's the lineage. Oh, okay, I know why the numbers are different. This one has test data, this one doesn't. So there's data provenance also can help with things like problem solving and stuff too. But there's also as one person once told me, Sheeri, there's only two reasons for lineage, upstream and downstream. So downstream is like impact analysis. And the quintessential example is like if you're gonna drop a column or table, you don't drop columns or tables that often. But let's say you start your business, you grow it, it's growing well, congratulations. Well, now you're moving into, I don't know, the Japanese market. So now you gotta deal with dollars and yen. And how are you gonna do that? Now you need to know every place that you have an amount. You're gonna need to add currency into it. And all the reports that you do, you can't now just add up and average and whatever. You have to like take into account the different currencies. So you'll know that impact analysis is going down. How do you change that? Definitely the migration validation. And then actually I had a customer that uses Lineage for onboarding because it's basically an architecture diagram for your data.
So I agree with all of that. And by the way, Sheeri, it's never 2 days to figure out what's wrong. It's like 2 minutes to figure out what's wrong.
Well, if you don't have Lineage, you need to like call the right team, and then they're on vacation, they get back to you. And
my favorite question to ask prospects and customers is, well, how are you doing Lineage today? And people have been doing Lineage for eons. They just do it with phone calls. They do it with email. They run down the hallway. And that person isn't there today, and they still have to get this answer. And what have they done over the years and still are doing it is, hiring huge armies of people that go through crawling through code or looking at, logs to try and figure it out, right? And Open Lineage offers us a way to cut through that
We can get rid of those people's jobs. We don't need AI to get rid of people's jobs.
Actually, that brings me to the next question, right? Like, so why has it been challenging to collect lineage, right? So you talked about like the manual aspect, like someone has to tell me, where this table is coming from, how we do this. So someone has to know and report it, and so it's very manual. So what else? Like, I'm assuming we've tried to automate this. Like, what makes it challenging?
So, I mean, you can collect lineage in several ways, right? So you can either have everyone report centrally to a system and say, hey, I read this, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm writing to, and then you're kind of counting on people to do that. Or maybe you have a shared library or shared resource that people use, and hopefully they all stick to the same standard and no one deviates, but of course they will. You could try to observe what's going on, so kind of read everyone's code base, hopefully programmatically, but try to figure out what's going on from the system. You could look at query logs, try to infer lineage from that. But it's a lot of kind of patchwork of different systems that you have to navigate. And it is really challenging, and everyone's data ecosystem is a bit different. Everyone uses a different combination of tools, and that becomes super, super tricky. Like if we also listened to the previous talk, it was, all right, use the same thing to orchestrate everything. That's perfect, but is it really the case? Probably never, right? And even if it was at first, over time, it's not going to be that. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges with collecting lineage.
So fragmentation of like people using different tools, doing things different ways, and so on.
That's part of it, fragmentation. I mean, I think any lineage goal should be ultimately to aim for end-to-end coverage with column level detail. So in order to construct that, you have to go through what I know Sheeri and Ernie are familiar with and what Harel was just describing. It's a myriad of layered approaches. Some of them could, I think, adequately be described as forensics. But it's not just the fragmentation. The reality is there are a lot of popular tools that I'd imagine some of the folks in this audience are using today as part of their data stack that were built without recognition of the value of metadata provisioning. And the ecosystem has been stuck for a long time with manual annotation and the like. That's why I'm so excited about Open Lineage, and Atlan has been invested almost 2 years now, waiting for a framework to really emerge, seemingly as the winner. And I'm pretty confident today, I think Open Lineage has reached that point. Everyone here on the stage has been involved for quite a long time. Myself, not as much as my compatriots up on the stage, but you're seeing a lot of tools begin to start adopting Open Lineage as a standard to fill gaps in metadata provisioning. So we see that with Airflow, for example. But then also for tools that are investing in metadata provisioning, almost using it as a transmission protocol in a sense. So we're seeing a lot of adoption. So it's a good open source project to attach yourself to. I think especially if you've got experience with some of the existing integration tooling, like Spark, for example, Airflow. There's such a myriad of implementations that experience from the community here coming to bear with the Open Lineage format, I think would be a great thing. So we'd like to encourage that.
I think that the timing is right also, right? You go back and look at the past couple of decades and how SQL developed and how SQL was embedded in bunches of tools. And then there were ETL products out there that established their own way of being able to illustrate what lineage is if you could crawl inside their code. Of course, crawling inside their code was difficult. But as we look at a lot of the solutions like Spark and Python that people are doing now, the creativity that people have in the way they can come up with their solution, there's no just standard code that you can go parse through. And so those old methods aren't going to function anymore. We need something that's much more proactive, and Open Lineage, providing an event framework for doing lineage, offers that.
You mean, Ernie, AI is not going to solve that for everyone?
Yeah, of course you throw AI at the problem, and it's like...
Yeah. Go ahead, have fun with your compliance audit when you give it lineage that was AI generated.
So, you started talking about standards, right, and standardization, and so I guess that's related to the fragmentation aspect, right? Like, so what you're saying is, okay, there's all those things, and they could be more opaque. So, of course, SQL was very describing what the transformation was, but now if you have Python scripts and things like that, they're way more opaque, what Ernie mentioned. And so, what's the benefit of standardization in that aspect? Right? So I think like you hinted at it quite a bit. How does that solve things? How do you do standards even in that sense?
My perspective is, as an engineer, I hate doing duplicate work. So if I can do something once and be done with it, that's what I want to do. So if we all choose a standard and we just stick with it, then we're done. Of course, then you come up with, the XKCD sketch of, oh, I'll invent a new standard, so now there's 97 standards. So hopefully that doesn't happen and people kind of understand that we need this. But, the web works on one standard for the most part, right? Like most internet technologies use the same stack. Why can't we do the same when we talk about metadata for data scheduling, for processing, for collecting and producing lineage?
I think it helps too if we observe and take a look at some lessons from other industries. If you think back 25 years ago, somebody pulled together the manufacturers of digital photography and said, we need a way to have common metadata for the size, for the location, for the all the other details that go into a digital photograph. And now here we are 20 years later, no one really thinks about that across the different manufacturers and wherever you get your phone, wherever you get your camera, all that stuff's the same. And then the tons of software that's out there that lets you sort it, work with it, manage it, edit it, everything. They can be creative there. And the same thing is true here. If all of us vendors up here are just constantly competing and reduplicating, as Harel said, the works to go and get the lineage, then we're not putting our creative energy, so that all of you can take advantage of it, into what we do with that metadata. And so it eliminates that one piece of it, and it also helps customers because they're concerned about vendor lock-in, they want interchangeability, and all of that now can potentially be a reality or will be a reality as Open Lineage continues to grow.
And having a standard, it's not just great for the deduplication of work, meaning like I don't have to go to some ETL tool and then reverse engineer the information I can get from that and put that into whatever my lineage format is and, lather, rinse, repeat. But I can know what information I'm going to get from Open Lineage, right? I know that it's going to give me the transformation, right? The SQL or whatever the transformation was. I know that it can give me the duration of, the job. I know that it can give me the time it started. I know it can give me the volume of data that was changed. So now I can use that information knowing that it is a standard that I will probably get this set of information, right? And whereas now with different vendors, it's like you get different information. And so we'll be able to standardize our offerings to say, hey, we're going to consume this data and here's what we're going to make from it. And it's going to look the same no matter what ETL tools you're using.
Very well said, both of you. And I think that just to add to the point about fragmentation in the stack, that makes it challenging without Open Lineage in many cases to go and get the metadata. But on the flip side, it's actually a situation where that metadata is the most valuable because it's that metadata that allows you to knit together experience of all those best-in-class tools for those different people in your data operation that are sitting somewhere on the assembly line of data products with varying levels of technical skill, and essentially use that to knit together a common experience. And Lineage is kind of the baseline connectivity level of all of it. So it's just very exciting to see how fast the momentum's been picking up the last several months.
The value of Lineage also goes up the more complete picture you have. So if you're missing half your tools and you have a lineage diagram that only shows half your tools, you're missing a lot of information. How can you go to your auditor and say, like, look, I'm in compliance? It's like, well, you're only showing me half of your systems, right? But if you can do 100% of them, right? So we can say to, all of you founders in the room here, if you're running queries and you're doing things, we could say like, hey, implement Open Lineage now because then you'll have automatic integration with all of our tools when you're ready to do that.
Okay, so we talked a bit about how standardization and creating this ecosystem is good for customers, is good for vendors because they have to implement, getting lineage once, right? And making sure there's a standardization of how we expose the lineage and do the instrumentation and the observability aspect. And then it's easy to try various products, right? And then several of you on this panel actually sell products that consume lineage and then produce a lot of value for customer, whether it's for compliance or data observability or other things, right? And several of you have mentioned Open Lineage, and we haven't talked about what Open Lineage is yet. So who wants to talk a bit about what is Open Lineage? You know?
I'm gonna do a short reveal.
Oh,
So
Getting hot in there.
I know. Talking about data lineage. So Open Lineage is really a spec. It's at the core of the thing. It's a JSON schema. That's all there is to it, right? Like it's an idea that we can all talk and reason about jobs, data sets, the runs of them in a shared way, and then we can extend that. So it's base enough that everyone can chip in and it works for everyone's use case, but then it's extensible enough so each individual vendor or open source user can go in and implement their own version of it and make it fit into their world. And I think the evidence to that is for people here who use it in different companies, some of them competing, but still want to invest in the spec, want to invest in making this successful because it provides business value. So that's what Open Lineage is at the core. But then on top of that, Open Lineage and the community of Open Lineage, which is growing and I'm super thankful for all that community, is a set of integrations to extract lineage metadata from Spark, Airflow, DBT, Flink, Dagster. The list is too long. I'm kind of forgetting at this point.
It's growing.
It's growing. So that's what Open Lineage is.
yeah, I think that's a very important point. You don't just like download Open Lineage like you would download Airflow or download Marquez. You can download integrations that can help you produce the Open Lineage format or consume the Open Lineage format. And so that's where I think a lot of people get hung up on the nuance of like, okay, Open Lineage sounds great. Where do I download it?
And one important point I think to reinforce is that Open Lineage is really aimed at filling the gaps with some very popular existing tools in their metadata provisioning. But in and of itself, it's not going to extract the value of that metadata that's been captured, right? Those would be really the value add from other tools in your stack that might be existing and have been waiting for that metadata to be available. So again, it's just a framework for implementing that's really an enabling connectivity layer for the entirety of your data stack.
Another point to the bit that Harel said about it being a spec, while the community has lots of enterprising and creative folks that are helping to build the adapters for Open Lineage, like for Airflow, et cetera, it isn't just a download, and we're talking to a lot of customers who have homegrown applications of their own, written in, you name it, full gamut. And so they've decided that it makes sense for them to have those applications emit this JSON to describe the lineage, because then again, now, whatever this myriad of applications is that they have, they can look at other tools, including Open Lineage UI itself, to help them illustrate that lineage and really meet their objectives.
Yeah, there's an interesting point on Open Lineage. The goal is to be just a spec. But of course, to become just a spec, you need to get the integration going, right? You need producers of Lineage. And of course, Open Lineage started with having integration from a bunch of those projects, from Airflow to Spark, to Flink, DBT, and so on. And Dagster, that we just heard about this morning. But the goal is to have this all built in the ecosystem. Like Open Lineage doesn't do anything. It just provides a standard. And one good example of this is the Airflow integration moved from the Open Lineage project to the Airflow project. So now Open Lineage support is built in Airflow. It's not something that Open Lineage is reverse engineering Airflow or something. It's something that is a feature in Airflow to expose lineage in a standard representation. And that's very powerful, right? And that's what enables, of course, in proprietary products, whether it's an ETL product or something, you cannot go and reverse engineer the internals because you don't have access to the source code like you have for open source project. But they play in this ecosystem, right? And you can have this open source ecosystem where proprietary and open source products work together, and it's very powerful. So actually, I had a question about that. How important to you it is that Open Lineage is an open source project Apache license, and it's in an open source foundation, like part of the Linux Foundation in the LFAI and data. How is that important for you to be part of this ecosystem and what that brings as guarantees?
I'll start off and say I think metadata is very important IP for an organization, and there should never be any vendor lock-in. So an open source spec is going to prevent that. Now that means things are more competitive from some of the folks on the stage, but we would rather compete on that playing field than spend our time trying to extract the damn lineage, to be honest with you. So this is my thoughts. I'd like to hear more.
There are too many products. There's a list of as long as all the arms of every one of us in here, and new things that are coming out up on the web all the time. And I still get requests on mainframe tools that I cut my teeth on back in the 1980s, and people want Lineage for it. And regardless of what that is, there aren't enough developers or resource dollars for us to just build point-to-point bridges. It's impractical and makes no sense. And to echo what Eric said, right? We want to be able to put our creative juices elsewhere, not on the plumbing.
So what practical problems does that solve for customers, for your customers? Do you have like stories you can tell of something that that solved, like Open Lineage solved, or like this standardization of Lineage?
I think for me, it's helped a lot with partnerships. It's a lot easier to talk to an ETL company and say, hey, we don't have an integration for you yet. We want to do an integration with you. Here's our timeline. Maybe they want to build the integration. Whoever wants to build the integration, we literally have the spec. This is what should come out. This is the format we need it in. And if it was, kind of harkening back to the previous question also, if it was a format that was standardized by one vendor, I don't think we'd all be up on this stage, right? We wouldn't be like, oh, I don't want to, hype up this other vendor standard that's a competitor to me, right? But we are on this stage because we can all work together to say like, hey, you know what? This spec is great, but I need to tweak it this way to work for me. And somebody else says, I need to tweak it that way to work for me. And we can coexist in harmony, as opposed to like, if Collibra like made the standard and then somebody came up and was like, well, we need you to do this. We'd be like, no way. Because it's a competitive thing. Whereas this is not a competitive thing. It's like, what can we do to make it the best for everyone? And then, of course, if a company goes out of business or decides to close up and they're not going to share the standard anymore, right? You have that risk with open source that like it could just go away. There could, I don't know, like a bomb could go off here and all of the Open Lineage, whatever, now goes away. Now what happens? It's like it's on GitHub. You can fork it. Or you can take it over, right? Like if everyone with a commit bit, is on the same plane or something and something bad happens, right? What are you going to do? You could fork it in the worst case instance if nobody has permissions to.
And in that case, the Open Lineage name and project is owned by the LFAI and data, which is a sub-foundation of the Linux Foundation. So that entity, even any of the companies contributing folds, right, that entity is still going to exist.
As a MySQL DBA for so long, I do not worry too much about things going away. It's more about people like, like I have a fight with you and they're like, oh, I'm going to fork my own. That happens a lot more often than abandonment. But honestly, for customers, it's for partners, it's easier for me to convince them like, hey, we should really partner together on an integration. They don't want to do the work just to integrate with my company software. If I can say, hey, look, if you do the work to integrate with my company software and you're automatically gonna be able to go with other company software too, they're way more willing to do that work. And they're more willing to own that part of it. So my team may not have to do the integration, your team may not have to do the integration, right? We just have to integrate with Open Lineage, and then the company can do all the work to produce it in the right manner. So it also takes work off my side, which also helps my customers get more of the features they want.
Right. And they're more motivated to do it for solutions that they have no lineage for at all. So if they do make the effort, just because they're using IBM's solution, They could switch over later, or what typically happens at a lot of the large organizations is probably we are all at some customers, right? Because it's they do acquisitions. One department chose this product, and a year later, some other product chose another one. If you saw Pete's presentation before, it was clear. And that was with a small company that he was illustrating. And so since we're all present, people have to interchange at those organizations, and Open Lineage kind of gives them that comfort level that they can.
One of the more interesting phenomenon that I have come about in working in this product space is that I'm working with ETL developers, okay? They're developers. I don't need to convince them to say like, hey, you know what, while you're developing your hundreds of lines and thousands of DAGs and whatever, you know, if you could just put like one little thing in there, like put that operator in there, or put that thing in there, and then we can automatically get lineage from everything. They're like, I hear what you're saying, right? Like I can be super lazy, like make a library and then everything runs against the library and then now I have lineage. They're willing to do that as opposed to making their own lineage solutions because they know how hard it is.
Or in the past, when you ask the developer, fill out this form for all the lineage and what's happening in that tool, metadata was completely forgotten. It was the last thing on the project. There's not enough time left, so nobody documented how the data moves.
And nobody remembers that like one Sunday a month this happens, right?
And even if someone did, make the extra effort to document it, it became stale a second after it was done, right? So as long as it's not connected to the production system that's generating the data and it's not integrated and tracking the changes as they happen, it's just not useful after a few days, weeks, months, but it will become stale. Right?
So what are challenges with Open Lineage? What are improvements you wish existed? What's missing? What's next?
So what's next, I think, is y'all are here and this group is here. This is a community thing, and it's something that we put out there when you put energy and a lot of our love into. But then we want to see what other use cases people come up with in the community and kind of see more things. So I can imagine things like we could use lineage information to do operational stuff, right? So we can do like a meta orchestrator that looks at what's happening across everything and help make smarter decisions or make decisions on what we shouldn't schedule. Or you can imagine like, oh, I just want this data set live by 9 a.m. and have a system that figures out all the upstream, or let me know if something is not going to happen in time, but do that in a predictive way that is grounded on actual facts and not trying to guess based on trends or statistics. Like you get a lot more metadata to make these calculations accurate.
I'm looking forward for people to take better advantage of Open Lineage as it evolves to do static lineage. It's been very event-oriented. Talk about Spark, Python, being able to capture lineage that is otherwise completely hidden from you. But thanks to Julian and the rest of the community, there is the ability in Open Lineage to represent more static. Like, this is a job. So why not have us reach a point where there's tools that will map out the lineage for tomorrow, right? An application I want to deploy at the beginning of 2026.
Pete Hunt.
Let's wrap up Lineage now for it.
Pete Hunt in the last talk was talking a lot about the advantages and disadvantages of an asset-based model versus a workflow-based model. And, as someone who works in a data catalog space, right, we do a lot with assets and pipelines. And one of the things about pipelines is the pipelines are what connect those assets, right? The pipelines are the action and the verbs, and the assets are like, they're the nouns, they're the things that are happening. And so being able to connect them, so if you are building a tool, right, that is moving data from one place to another, at some point, somebody's going to want to know what data did you move and where and what did you do to it, right? So if you're building that, you have to do that. And all of this is making pipelines, right, a first-class citizen. And the last talk was kind of like, well, maybe you shouldn't really pump up pipelines so much because assets are still important. Very valid and great points. And when you talk about things like data observability, right? Data observability, the elevator pitch, the soundbite, which is very reductive but also still correct, is that data observability is watching your data go through the pipeline and making sure it's still good, trustworthy. AI is just another one of those pipelines. It's a very specialized pipelines, but it takes in inputs and it spits out an output. I like to talk about Lineage as boxes and lines, right? You have boxes, you draw lines, maybe it's circles and lines, whatever shapes you want to use, triangles, stars, hearts, anything. Whoever gets me a data lineage diagram in hearts, I'll have chocolate for you or something, because that would be amazing. It's boxes and lines, and AI is also boxes and lines. It's a little more complicated because your model is kind of iterative as opposed to the same, inputs over and over and over. But I think it's very exciting to see how Lineage can help with AI and AI governance, and to be able to do AI governance in the same way that we do data governance today, because it's only going to be more and more complicated to prove where did you get the data for your models. How did you do it? Are you compliant with all the new regulations that are going to happen?
Nice. And so on that, I'd like to use the last few minutes to open up to questions from the audience. So maybe we can get a microphone okay. Excuse me. Can we have a microphone for the questions? Thank you. So anybody has a question for the panel? Raise your hand. Like here in the front, or over there as well. We can start here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for all the thoughts that you've shared today. I'm curious about gaining greater adoption. We've talked about different, orchestration tools and such that would have Open Lineage as part of their offering. But what about, I guess I'm wondering, like the cloud providers themselves and other kind of application providers, whether it's, Tableau or AWS or Azure or whatever it might be. There are a lot of Snowflake. There are a lot of ways in which data might move simply within those environments or be exported from those environments, or you push data into an S3 bucket, it goes to Dynamo, it's served up at an API, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. But these are not orchestrated events. These are simply things that are happening within that cloud environment or elsewhere. And what's the effort to get greater adoption in those types of platforms?
So maybe I can take that one. This is not a comprehensive panel, so I had to actually cut down some people because we had 4 seats total. So Open Lineage today is adopted in Azure. So Azure Purview, which is their data catalog, accepts Open Lineage. You can consume today. On the Google Cloud side of things, you can get Lineage out of Dataproc into their Dataplex product, which is their data catalog solution. At the last Airflow Summit, they talk about using their Airflow integration to get from Composer as well. So of course, we're at the beginning of the Open Lineage revolution, but the cloud providers have started implementing this, and they do have data catalog. They have the same needs, right? So they're not on stage today, but we have a few of them participating regularly in the community and slowly starting to add lineage coverage as this goes on.
Julian is being
not just
honestly. We started. I don't know, Sheeri, you and I met a couple years ago, and we were starting to get involved. And it has just grown, and I would point a lot to Julian's advocacy and campaigning for this. I mean, it seems like every time we have a new meeting, he's telling about some other exciting group that's involved, and wow, Google's getting involved, and wow, Microsoft's attending now and really got heavily involved with their Purview catalog and the rest of the Azure platform, and it's exciting to watch that growth and be part of it, and it really has been expanding, and that's what it takes. Right? It needs a sort of core that then, becomes this growing mass as people get on. As soon as that happens, more vendors start climbing on board.
just one small point. It's not only orchestrators in that sense. So Spark and Flink are execution and processing engines, right? So that also, and they have adopted, that we have open lineage integrations. The Flink community has been also very receptive about making changes to Flink to make open lineage work better. So there's a lot of collaboration from the other open source projects.
Yeah, I think in the past year, in December, I went to the Wayback Machine in December and also did the current one. And I think it was something like, I forget if it was consumers or producers, but looking at the ecosystem webpage on openlineage.io, it's one of them doubled and one of them tripled. I think producers doubled and consumers tripled, or the other way around. It was, and I mean, yeah, we're not going from like 1 million to 3 million. But, when you're talking about going from like, 4 to 9, and now you've added Azure and Google, right? The bigger players, right? As opposed to, I mean, Spark is a huge player. It's everywhere, but it's kind of, it's open source. So it's kind of like, friendly, whatever. When you start to get the landscape of, competitors now getting in on it, right? Why would I implement Open Lineage when it makes it easier for a customer to leave to somebody else's software, right? But when we're all agreeing like this is great, then yeah, everything else is going to come on board.
Well, another anecdotal evidence of this is in talking to customers, and I'm sure it's happened to all of you as well. Go back 2 years, it was kind of like a religious thing, and I'm being passionate trying to get a customer to like, you should see this thing called Open Lineage. Oh, what's that? Now, I have people asking me on the first meeting, are you guys supporting Open Lineage? Mm-hmm. Right? Are you looking at it, et cetera? And I think that is a really good proof point.
Thank you.